Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase performance and also increase muscle, aka hypertrophy, improve body composition, and do all of it within a flexible framework without destroying your health. Today on the podcast, he's back once again. It's my good buddy, Dr. Phil Batterson. And this time, we're talking all about anaerobic metabolism. We get into all sorts of fun stuff. We geek out a little bit over different types of sensors, from Moxie to metabolic carts, such as Pinoy. And primarily here talking about the anaerobic, the high intensity side of training, sometimes referred to as, I guess you could say, maybe hybrid athlete. Although hybrid tends to be a blending of more cardiovascular and strength work. But we talk about lactate a fair amount, why it's not necessarily a bad thing, what are a bunch of the myths around lactate, the different bioenergetic systems and adaptations to it, a definition of anaerobic versus aerobic metabolism, what are the pros and cons of that, and is there actually a real division of that? How do you do lactate testing, some practical examples, and a whole lot more. So if you enjoy this podcast, check out some of our sponsors. If you're looking for tasty electrolytes, check out our friends over at Element. I'm drinking the raspberry one today. For ketones, we will have more from Tecton Ketone Esters. Hoping to have a big announcement from them around the first or second week of October. The short version is they redid all of the products and they've got some really cool stuff coming out. They're just working on the final, I guess you could say, more on the deliverability side, trying to make sure they have enough product and everything else. So, as soon as I can formally tell you what's going on, I'll have more from them. In this podcast, we also talk about cardiovascular equipment to do both aerobic and anaerobic conditioning. My two favorites for that by far are, number one, the Concept 2 rower, and then right behind it, I would say, is the Echo Assault Bike. Both those are great because it's primarily concentric only, but you can do everything from aerobic style stuff to high output anaerobic, short duration, interval work with both. If you are a meathead listening to this podcast and are not very good at running, it's great. You don't have to know how to run to use either one of them. And there's low impact with body weight is supported also. Again, if you are able to run, I do think running can be super useful. But for a lot of people, I would rather throw battery acid in my eyes and watch them run. So having something like a rower or an Echo bike is great. So check out our friends over at Rogue. You can pick up the Concept 2 rower, which is my favorite. Rogue does have their own rower now. I don't have any feedback on it yet, but it looks pretty interesting. And then also check out the Rogue Echo bike for an assault bike. It is very well made. Both these pieces of equipment are highly reliable. I've had my own Concept 2 rower now for, maybe 4 or 5 years. And honestly, I haven't done anything really to it other than a couple basic maintenance stuff, and it's been working great. So it is an affiliate link, so check them out below. If you're looking for metabolic carts, check out my friends over at Pinoy. I don't have a formal link for them, but just hit me up and tell them Dr. Mike T. Nelson sent you. More than happy to put you in touch with those guys, answer any questions you have on their device, which I've been using now for, I think it's over 4 years now, which is wild. And then if you want more information from me, check out my newsletter. Go to the link down below. It'll put you directly onto the daily newsletter with all the great information. So without further ado, enjoy this podcast here on anaerobic metabolism, Dr. Phil Batterson. And then also as a heads up, when you hop onto the newsletter, I will have the Flexible Meathead Cardio course, both the aerobic and the anaerobic portions will be out again sometime somewhat soon. I don't know the exact dates, but if you hop onto the newsletter, as soon as they are released, you'll be the very first to know. And we've gotten some really great feedback on that. So thank you so much. Enjoy this episode with Dr. Phil. Hey, what's up? It's Dr. Mike Nelson here again. This is just a short note to say that we started off with some uber, really geeky stuff that I thought was super interesting, but might be completely over the heads of everyone before we even explain what the hell's going on. So I took the super geeky stuff and we moved it towards the end of the show. So if you really want to go super far down into the weeds, I'll listen towards the end of the show. We moved all the information there, but still wanted to leave it in because I thought it was, of course I'm biased, but I thought it was super interesting. So here you go. Enjoy the show. Hello.
Hey Mike, how you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Yeah, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Yeah. How's the Moxie stuff going? Because I know you work
Good.
there now, correct?
Yeah, I've been working with them for like 7 years. I started during my master's degree,
Oh, okay.
just like helping out here and there. And my role now is really translating the science, being a little bit more of the community manager. So when we work with social or people on social media, big influencers and stuff like that, I'm working with them, getting people up to speed like Chris, and then a little bit more of the get people like answering people's questions, like those sort of things. So I do that 3/4 time. And then I also do my endurance coaching, which I'm up to 10 athletes now, which
Oh,
is,
cool.
yeah. So slowly but surely. I was telling you on Instagram, I was going through this business marketing like
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
online course. It was super helpful because it helped give me strategies and like systems to put into place of, okay, here's what you need to post. Here's the type of post you need to make, like those sort of things. Here's what resonates with people, as opposed to just being like, okay, well, what's going to get the most views and likes in all of that. So I was doing that, and I'm getting married next week, and then doing a
Oh,
honeymoon
wow.
for 4 weeks after that. So everything's going to be on pause for a little while after that, but it'll be
Oh,
much needed rest.
congrats. Where are you going?
Thanks. So we're going to get married on the coast of Oregon over here, and then we are going to
Haystack Rock? No, I'm just
what's
kidding.
that?
Like the Haystack area, or what's the big rock development out there?
Oh, there's a lot.
Side?
Yeah, no, we're going down. It's a little bit more south.
Okay.
It's a really pretty area. Have you heard of you don't golf or anything like that, do you?
No. Well,
There's
I
a
not anymore. I used to, but I
okay.
quit.
Yeah, yeah. There's a really famous like golf area out in the Bandon,
Okay.
like Bandon. So it's near there. And then we have a camper van. We're going to take our 3 dogs and our cat. We're just going to go around the Pacific Northwest for a month.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, should be good.
Yeah, you can go hang out in the Hood River area, do some wineries, do the little Fruit Loop area and stuff
Yeah.
there, and yeah,
Yeah,
I
we're
love Oregon.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. We love it. And we're planning on going even further north, like up to the Olympic Peninsula.
Oh
We're
yeah.
gonna go over to the Orca Islands and stuff in
Oh, fun.
Washington, and then hopefully up into British Columbia. And the part of me is, I know a lot of people at UBC, and I'm like, oh
Hmm.
babe, it'd be so much fun to go explore, look at all their stuff. She would not
He's like,
want to do
what?
any of
Our
that.
honeymoon? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Damn
we're not
nerds.
gonna go we're not gonna go look at like mitochondrial fizz labs and those sort of things. But
Yeah,
so so yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. And it's both her and I are entrepreneurs, so we never get much time off. So this will be like a good chunk of time off where we're actually like getting out doing stuff we love to do that we haven't gotten to do in a long time.
nice. And what does she do?
She's a dog trainer, a professional dog
Oh,
trainer.
interesting. Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Nice.
So if you have a dog that you want to have better behavior, you can send them out to her.
All right. I can send my sister's dog out there. She's actually quite good, but she's just a little too smart, so she trains my parents. So,
Ah,
yeah. It's not so much the dog's issue. She's actually really good, but she learned like when my parents will come stay with my sister that hey, sister will go to bed, so the dog will get a treat, go outside. It'll lay next to my sister for a while, and then my parents are still up. So then after my sister falls asleep, the dog will get up, go to my dad. My dad will go to bed, so he gets a treat from him, and then she gets a treat from my mom, and then she just does this little routine every night.
it's I don't know if we can. Well, so a lot of what she does is she trains
Probably trains humans.
the humans the
Yeah.
most, because that's ultimately communicating with the animals what you need to do, right? And yeah, that's actually really funny. We have Australian shepherds, so they
Oh,
try to do the same thing. They're really smart, and almost too smart for their own good. So they'll figure that sort of stuff out, and they know who they can get away, like not listening and stuff. And it's mostly me. So I'm just like, guys, just listen to me, please. Don't make me get your mom. And then of course the authority comes in. They're like, oh, we'll listen now.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, guys.
Yeah. I think all those little smaller herding breeds they're super interesting because it's like they just need a task to do. And they're
Yeah.
sometimes a little too smart for their own good if they're just left on their own devices.
Yeah. They'll find a task to do, whether you like it or not, really. And it can result in a lot of anxiety in those types of dogs because they just don't have an energy outlet. And it's amazing how many people are like, oh, those dogs are so cool. They see like a border collie, like you know, doing sheep herding and stuff. And they're like, then they get one and then they don't go run 5 miles a day with it. And they're like, why is this dog so crazy? Because you got to stimulate it both physically and mentally. And it can be really tough for people. So it's like discourage people from getting like shepherds unless they really can handle it. It's like, just get a lab or something like that.
Yeah.
They're happy. They're pretty
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you can go fetch them. They'll be happy. They're not going to try to eat all your drywall, other things like that. So
Yeah, my sister has a corgi and it's Bella, and yeah, she's great, but she started taking her to what she calls sniffer class. So they would train her on how to find different scents, and so she would hide these little scents in the house. And it's funny, she does a really good job with it. And even just doing that for 20 minutes or so, the dog then just goes, takes a nap, and is just completely chilled out. Just,
yeah.
well, she just needs a task and something mentally to do.
Yeah, corgis are really interesting because I think oh man, I might butcher this, but I think they were actually like bred to be like they're shepherding dogs as well. So
yeah, they're a herding dog for cattle primarily.
Yeah. So for cattle, because the cattle, when they kick out, like the corgis are so low, they won't get kicked. But it's like, people get corgis again because they're like, oh, they're so cute and small, like little potatoes. And you're like, no, they still have a lot of energy and they need to get their energy out.
Yeah. The attitude also of a big dog, you just shrunk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll just do a short pause and you good for about 40 minutes or so. Is that true?
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm good.
Yeah. I'm just going to talk more about anaerobic stuff and we'll just move some of the Moxie stuff to the end here. So,
yeah.
Cool, man. All right. I'll do a pause and away we go. Cool. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Phil. How are you? Did anyone call you Dr. Phil? I just find it funny. So
yeah, no, you totally can. And for anyone listening out there, I did not twist Dr. Mike's arm to make him call me Dr. Phil or anything like that. But yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Today we're talking all about the anaerobic metabolism. I'll link to the other episode where we talked about aerobic metabolism. And I guess the basic question is, I don't know, maybe it's not even basic, but do you think there is such a thing as the aerobic anaerobic split? I have all sorts of issues with it, but I've tried to get away from it, but I find myself just like one of those little attractor areas, just gravitating back towards it because to start a discussion, it's so hard to go so far into the weeds right away that you lose everyone. And unfortunately, I even created a whole class where I split it between aerobic and anaerobic right now. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've been finding with social media stuff and just interacting with more athletes here and there is like a lot of the things that we as academics and researchers and PhD having individuals argue about is it's syntax versus application here. Right. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, like I need to do some anaerobic work and I need to do some aerobic work. And that's how I'm going to develop myself for whatever team sport it is, strength training, endurance sport, like anything. I used to be the type of person who's like, well, actually,
hold on there, bucko.
Yeah. Actually, everything is aerobic and nothing is truly anaerobic because the connection between here and here, and then their eyes gloss over. They think you're an asshole, and then they don't want to listen. As opposed to saying, "Oh yeah, I really like that approach. How are you going to approach that?" And then guiding them in a way of being like, "Yeah, if you want to do things that are more anaerobic," and like for those just listening to the podcast, I'm putting that in air quotes. It's high intensity, couple reps, maybe up to 5-10 seconds, maybe even up to 30 seconds if you're really cranking on it. And then the rest, everything is just a different shade of like super high force power output, which I would deem strength, all the way to endurance stuff, which is like things that you can do for your entire life and just walking or something like that. And so that's the way that I like partition it in my brain a little bit more now, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it's even teaching students for years, I always tried to get across to them that the analogy I use all the time, and I don't remember who I even stole it from, is that most things are dimmer switches or mixing knobs and not on
Yep.
and off.
Yep.
Rarely do we have anything in physiology that's on or off. Yes, I get it. You have threshold effects and maybe leucine and muscle protein synthesis and stuff like that. So yes, there is a real thing, but especially in the world of bioenergetics, it's more the analogy I've used is this one bucket fills this other bucket that fills this other bucket that fills the other bucket. It just depends on which bucket you're looking at and what time domain you're looking at, but you're always thinking of dimmer switches, not on and off. Like the
Yeah.
ATP-PC system isn't really on or off. It's just how much are you emphasizing that particular system. So if I'm
Right.
really doing 5-second intervals, yeah, ATP, PC, whatever name we want to call that system now. It seems like it's got too many names.
Yeah.
Great.
Always.
Yeah, I get it. So super high intensity, great. All the way to purely aerobic stuff, fasted walks in the morning, etc. It's
Yeah.
just this long continuum of these dimmer switches you're playing with intensity on.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the that's why I think thinking about it from more of the like functional side of things is a little bit more applicable in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
because you say, okay, well, if you want to get good at sprinting, is no, I don't have to explain to you that you have to do anaerobic work in order to do it. To get good at sprinting, you have to do sprinting, right?
Yeah, you
You
got to
have
go
to,
sprint.
yeah, you got to go sprint. You can't just
Shocker.
expect by going and walking 2 hours a day that you're going to be really good at sprinting, because those are different activities. So from like I think actually, I think I saw it from you, but the SAID principle, right?
Yeah.
Specific adaptation to induced demands. Maybe I think that was right. But it's, if you want to get good at a specific thing, you have to train it. The challenge is, and this is where I think like the splits start to come in, right? The 80-20 rule, polarized training, like other things like that. You can't really do a ton of sprinting
Mm-hmm.
or even high intensity stuff, or you can't expect, unless you're on gear or something like that, to lift every day and get better every day, right?
Yeah.
So
Especially if you're doing the same thing.
right, yeah, exactly. So if you're doing the same thing, if you're trying to sprint every day, like eventually you're going to cap out your ability to adapt with that, because you're going to be creating so much kind of degradation that your body can't recover in between. And then it becomes this like self-defeating thing where, you simply just can't do more of it. So on the flip side, you have to go and you have to do easy stuff, right? Easy stuff is generally more aerobic. So it's the balance. And then however you mix that up, right? Whether if you're trying to do 200-meter sprints and that's about 30 seconds, then you have to practice that. And then on the easy days, if you want to maintain some level of health or cardiovascular aerobic benefit, then you have to do the easy stuff in order to recover enough to get back to baseline or better than baseline from the stress that you just put on the system.
Yeah. And I think that to me is like, it's the never ending problem. And the air quote simplest problem I use is, hey, if you want to improve your 1RM deadlift, right? If we go to the way far end of the strength side, okay, the said principle would say you should go deadlift every single day or multiple times a day. And all of these would be at 95, 98, 100% of your 1RM. That is the most specific thing. And if you could do that, you probably would get better. But everybody
Mm-hmm.
knows that even if your mechanics are good, everything else is good, you're going to be limited on how often you can do that. Some people can get away with it more as you get higher level of training, the stress is higher. So you have more adaptations. Like Andy Bolton, the first guy to pull 1,000 pounds, I don't remember what his peaking phase was, but I think it was very infrequent deadlifts, right? I think Ed Cohen talked about the same thing, that almost all of his training was 80, 85% or something like that. So even advanced lifters have figured out over time that, yeah, this is the goal, the simple goal of lifting the most weight possible, but we can't do that all of the time. So then we have to
Mm-hmm.
talk about what transfers. What is this other thing we could do that we could get away with and then do that? And then you even get into, I know I've talked to Cal a lot about when we were writing the Triphasic 2 book, was oh wow, I have this super high intense training phase and it's mixed up with this and eccentric and all this other moving parts, but oh crap, none of my new athletes can make it through because their aerobic system sucks so bad they can't get back to baseline. So now I'm actually training an aerobic system for a strength and power athlete to get them to do the specific training,
Hmm.
which I think is still mind blowing for a lot of people of how everything is interrelated.
Yeah, and that's I think that's what makes it so challenging and complicated. And then we've also, by parsing things out, right, saying anaerobic versus
Yep.
aerobic, you make it a little bit easier to understand in a sense, because you can group things. And I think humans, like we as humans, like to group things together. Oh, well, that's definitely an anaerobic sort of development versus aerobic development. But to but then you could zoom in on the anaerobic development and you could say, well, the difference between a 1 rep max and 5 rep max, those are definitely different. And the way you're going to train for those are definitely different, but they're still technically more on the anaerobic side versus the aerobic side of things. Whereas if you're doing CrossFit or something like that, and you're trying to do 50 deadlifts of 225 or something like that, that's getting more into the aerobic side of things, because you just keep going and going and going. So you better make sure that you have a well-developed aerobic system, especially under the same movement, to be able to accomplish that task.
Yeah, I think I agree that our buddy Evan Pycon has talked about this too. I think trying to solve for CrossFit athletes, I think, is the hardest problem, right? Because powerlifting, we get it, long endurance, we get it. We've got a fair amount of data in those areas, but then you do CrossFit or High Rocks where you're mixing them all together, it's hard because like you have to be relatively strong. All those athletes at the top level are pretty strong. Are they powerlifting
Yeah.
strong? No. But overall, they're really freaking strong. And then you've got to do multiple competitions. You've got a skill component. You've got body weight stuff. Some stuff is independent of body weight. Now you've
Mm-hmm.
got multiple attempts to do it. You have to breathe under heavy loads. And now you're going to do this over multiple days if you're talking about the games competition. And
Yeah.
it's just a lot of parameters that are all conflicting a little bit with each other at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think of, well, I think High Rocks falls a little bit more to the endurance side, whereas
It's a little bit more developed and there's a lot more running.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You're what you're getting into when you're going
Yep.
into a High Rocks competition. It's about an hour to an hour and a half. You're going to run 8K and then you're going to do all your stations on top of that.
Yep.
But there is still the requisite that you have to have a certain amount of strength in order to be able to do that. It's the same thing with CrossFit. There's a requisite amount of strength that you need in CrossFit in order to just be in the picture of things. And then on top of that, now you have to do it under fatigue with like multiple competitions in one day, then more fatigue with multiple competitions in a weekend. And so then it becomes like it's strength, it's like a high strength requirement with a big endurance requirement as well. So it's all the hybrid athletes out there now. As if you're really trying to be hybrid, I think CrossFit is like that. And I'm probably going to make so many hybrid athletes so mad by saying that, but
Yeah. And even with hybrid athletes, it's just so varied because some
mm-hmm.
people are like, well, I just want to deadlift a lot and run a short mile. Like, okay. But then it's like, well, I want to run a marathon in this time and I want to squat this amount and deadlift this amount. I'm like, okay, like you can do that, but as the higher and higher you try to push that performance level, at some point trying to do that simultaneously is going to become impossible, right? We all
Right.
know like the top powerlifters are not even running marathons, much less winning them. The top Kipchoge is not out there winning like freaking powerlifting meets, right? So we know
Yeah.
at some point there is this divergence. It's the middle area. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I talked to Dr. Alyssa Olenek. She's got a pretty big following on Instagram and stuff. And what we kind of came up with, because we talked all about hybrid training in our podcast, was you have like pure strength on one side, pure endurance on the other, and then we'll say hybrid in the middle. And then sometimes you have people who have strength requirements, but want enough cardiovascular power to be able to not feel gassed walking
Mm-hmm.
upstairs and stuff like that. And then on the other side, you have like the runner or the cyclist who knows that strength training is important, but they do it for the performance gains, endurance performance
Yep.
gains, not to deadlift 500 pounds or whatever it is. So again, we're back to spectrums. That's going to be I think the theme of all of this, but back to the anaerobic sort of stuff. And we can focus on that now.
Yeah.
Like, what sort of questions, what sort of things do you want to talk about with that? What do you want people
Yeah,
to
I
learn?
guess my first question is if we just look at the higher end of the anaerobic side. So let's just say ATP-PC, and let's arbitrarily put a time domain on it so at least we can talk about it.
Yep.
Say 0 to 10-ish seconds.
Okay.
How trainable do you think that system is if we take strength training out of the equation? So we're not talking
Yeah.
about strength training to get better,
Yeah.
right? Because we all know that if you get stronger, everything's going to be sub-max. If you're doing a rowing or you're doing a bike, if you just have like thighs like a tree trunk, like for 10 seconds, your power output's probably going to be pretty good. So we know
Yeah.
on some level strength training definitely works.
Yeah.
But I guess there's kind of camps of, well, if I really work this 10-second energy domain, how much am I going to be expected to improve in that area, assuming I'm already doing my strength training and that's good to go?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I haven't dug into any literature really on that in a really long time, but I know that it's like one of the ways to make that better is by supplementing with creatine, right?
Oh
Because
yeah,
we,
supplements, creatine, and caffeine will definitely help.
yeah. So we'll just get that out of the way. It's
Yeah,
like,
for
if you don't
sure.
really want to train it,
Totally
just
valid.
yeah, take your creatine. And it's now I'm seeing stuff that's upwards of 20 grams, 25 grams of creatine could be useful for brain health and other things like that. And
Yeah,
I
I
have
have
to dig.
some issues with that. I have a whole long post of that coming out. But
Oh,
anyway,
okay. I'll check that out because I am interested to get your take on that. And then so your creatine is a 5 grams a day.
yeah, and
Just a
creatine's
top.
great. I love creatine.
Yeah, but it's not going to be the superfood that's going to stop anti-aging, cancer, other things
Yeah.
like that.
And performance-wise, it's probably one of the most efficacious supplements along with caffeine.
Yeah,
And even both of those, if you hit the right dose, you're still looking at single-digit percentages.
yeah,
So
yeah. So
obviously, to high-level athletes, they'll give their left nut for 2%. To the person who
right.
just crawled off the couch, yeah.
Yeah. So from that perspective, right, is like those high level athletes, right? They're searching for the marginal gains, whereas the person who just crawled off the couch, I can guarantee you, if you had somebody do 10-second sprints, never done sprints before, it's absolutely going to be beneficial to them.
Oh, no question.
Right.
100%.
To what extent? Like I'm thinking of a study, and this isn't the ATP PCR system we're talking about, but we did 7 days of high intensity interval training. So just 1 minute on, 1 minute off at trying to target around 90% of max heart rate.
Okay.
And across the board. So just after 7 sessions, 30 minutes, essentially 10 minutes of work a day over the course of 2 weeks, we showed a 30% increase to the mitochondrial function in general.
Nice.
And I would surmise that you'd probably see similar increases to the entire cellular bioenergetic systems going on with increased enzymes for both the like phosphocreatine and glycolysis, as well as just like better switching mechanisms like we were talking about offline, right? The dynamic range and the ability to switch is going to be a lot faster. So while I don't know the exact number, I would say it's like if you're doing like 10-second sprints as hard as you possibly can, like on a bike or something like that, there's going to be benefits to that. Now, is that going to apply to making you stronger? I don't know, unless you're getting gassed in 10 seconds. If you're doing something that's like super fast, right, and you're getting gassed in 10 seconds, then yes, probably. I think that's such a short time domain that unless you really wanted to just get your sprint speed up, then I don't know if that's really going to do it. I think for a lot of people is they're probably already getting a lot of that stimulus with their strength training, especially if they're getting up into every once in a while, getting up into the 8, 12, 15 rep range, which would be considered a little bit more like on the endurance side of stuff. So yeah, but if you do want to develop then cardiovascular system, I would say doing more of like the high intensity interval training or like something along those lines is going to be more beneficial to you than just like a 10-second sprint, for example, because you're already doing that with, so it's not going to be too disparate of a adaptation.
Yeah, I'm in the process of trying to figure this out by looking at the literature again, but it just seems to me that the athletes who do better on those short time domains and the coaches I know who work with them, it's almost all technique and mechanics based stuff. Like, do they
Yeah.
improve? Yes. Are there drills you can do to increase speed for a sprinter and change the direction, all that stuff? 100% yes. But it just seems to me that most of what they're doing is high technique, efficiency, output.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you said, okay, let's only talk about like just the average lifting meathead who's listening to this, I don't have that population do a lot of 10-second repeats on a rower or assault bike. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a huge benefit for that. I will have them do some 100 meters here and there just to get them used to creating power and to get that system going to start of a session, and maybe work up to do 2, 3, or 4, or something like that. Yeah, I've
Mhm.
done that a fair amount, but I don't know. My gut feeling is I don't know how trainable that ultra low end is independent of technique.
Yeah, like it's more of the technique, neuromuscular sort of changes versus, oh, is there's an expansion in the ATP PCR
Right.
pool that's actually resulting in a meaningful change, right? Because
Correct.
that's,
Yes.
yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with that. That's what we see, right? When people start lifting in general, right? Is you have more of those neural adaptations,
Mm.
and then the morphological adaptations come a little bit later. And it would be, so if we just think back to what our bioenergetics are trying to do for us, right? It's trying to allow for enough ATP to be created to maintain the force output that's required. And if our PCR system and the systems that kind of resynthesize all of that were not adequate, we'd be in pretty big trouble if back in the days when we were running from tigers and stuff like that, if all of a sudden we were just failed because
Oops.
yeah, exactly. Oh, yep. Phosphocreatine ran out in 10 seconds and now you're flat on
You're
your face
dead.
and
You're
you're
line
dead.
food.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's hard for me to believe that that's probably a robust enough system. What I'm trying to say is that's probably a robust enough system that there's probably not much change that's actually happening from purely just like the bioenergetic standpoint there.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought. And again, it doesn't mean that people should never train that system if it's specific to your sport and what you're doing. I think you can
Yeah.
still get better at it, but I think that's more of a neuromuscular adaptation, strength, efficiency, movement, not so much on a pure bioenergetic standpoint, I guess.
Right. And who knows, like we do know that the phosphocreatine is essentially rephosphorylated based on glycolytic system and the
Yep.
mitochondrial like oxidative phosphorylation. So almost in from some perspective, it's okay. Well, how do you make your glycolytic system and your oxidative phosphorylation system strong enough to rephosphorylate that fast enough that you can just continue to like recycle the phosphate groups to back to that, so then you can get the fast acting energy that is really what we're trying to target with ATP PCR.
Yeah. And I think that's more applicable to what most people are after. Yes, you can make an argument that maybe if you're a 100-meter runner, maybe repeated sprint ability isn't really a big thing, but at the same point, you got to accumulate enough volume in your training to get the reps, to learn the technique, to do everything else. So even then,
Mm-hmm.
even though your race is just a 100 meter, I think you'd still probably need a decent aerobic base and glycolytic flux to allow you again to do a quality enough training so that you can get the volume in training, even though your race performance may only be, air quotes, like a singular race here and there again.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So same with the people in the gym, your replenishment, like even if you're only doing, say, 5 to 8 reps, like nobody goes into the gym and just does one set of 5 to 8 reps and like, oh boy, I'm done. I leave now.
Yeah.
Right? You're probably going to do multiple sets. So if you can replete those systems again, and you were talking about, I guess we'll start with how much of that do you think is related to the glycolytic system and then also the aerobic system?
Yeah.
These are all the things I wonder about. That's why I'm
Yeah.
asking.
I know. And I love having these conversations. There's a really interesting study or just paper that came out. I think it was like early 2000s at this point, but it was talking about the glycogen shunt model of
Yeah.
kind of rephosphorylation and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't really talk about it within
No, I didn't
like
learn that in school per se.
yeah, and people still aren't really talking about it, but it essentially the idea is that all of the bioenergetic systems are linked to each other. And getting a little bit more like into the weeds, right? We say, oh, well, ATP PCR is 0 to 10 seconds, then 10 to 30 seconds is glycolytic system, and then 30 seconds onward is oxidative phosphorylation, or maybe up to 2 minutes, something along those lines. But what they were showing is that like the response times are actually on the millisecond scale. So you actually have like your ATP PCR when you start to contract your muscle goes down. It doesn't totally deplete, but then in between contractions, when things relax, your glycolytic system and the oxidative phosphorylation system are then acting to rephosphorylate your phosphocreatine. So then it goes up and it's this jagged up and down. And if there was something that did talk about like what percentage comes from where, it would have to be in that paper or something along those lines. But I think the higher the intensity, the more you're probably relying on the glycolytic system versus like a little bit lower intensity, you're relying on the oxidative phosphorylation system then a little bit more. But your body's not going to be like, oh, we only want the glycolytic system here. It doesn't care where those phosphates are coming from. You just need to, well, there's two things that happen, right? When you're lifting weights, if you're doing a set of 5 to 8, you either chose a weight that allows you to get to that 8 rep mark or you fail, right? And failure is fatigue. And fatigue is essentially our body's way of protecting us from catastrophic failure within like the cells. And I think it starts from an inability to then maintain ATP balance. So then there's all these cascading effects that then cause fatigue to come into play. And then you can't generate the same amount of force output. So yeah, that was a very like non-specific answer to, I think higher intensity, you're going to be a little bit more reliant on glycolysis just simply because of how fast you can generate ATP from that system. And then if it's a little bit lower in intensity, oxidative phosphorylation, but at the same time, it's like wherever that ATP is coming from, your body doesn't discriminate.
Yeah, and that's one thing that always bugged me. Even when I was in school, I'm like, okay, because I was classically taught exactly, okay, ATP-PC, and then you've got glycolysis, and then you got your aerobic system, and aerobic's primarily using fat, and it's slow, and all that stuff. And okay, yeah, that's generally true. And then I was like, okay, so if all of that's true, I think the lowest I've ever seen glycogen levels that they measured by just basically jamming a needle into the VMO typically 30%, maybe 40%. Like you can't drive it to absolute zero.
Right.
I've
Right.
never seen a study where we beat these people up so bad and they do heinous shit to people to drop them to 40%. It is freaking miserable stuff that they do to these poor bastards. And then they stick needles in them after they're done with that.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
only like 30, 40%. So to me, that tells me that baseline system has to be this intermediate that if you just wipe that out entirely, like you're effed. Like you just threw a huge monkey wrench into the whole business.
Well, and that's not even talking about lactate production, right? Which is
Correct.
also a huge mediator of cell signaling. It's
Yes.
not a fatigue, it's not causing fatigue, but it is maybe a monitor of like force production, which then from a whole body signaling perspective gives you an idea, or your other areas of your body an idea of, hey, we're running out here, or we're doing something that's really hard right now. So prepare to like slow things down. Yeah, I think without any one of the bioenergetic systems, we'd be completely screwed. If we didn't have phosphocreatine or ATP PCR, then we wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to wave my hands around and swing my hands. We would just be in like a state of like rigor almost immediately.
Yeah.
as we wait for glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation to ramp up. If we didn't have glycolysis, then we wouldn't have, again, that like intermediary for like prolonged, like higher force production. And then if we didn't have oxidative phosphorylation, then we wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to stand because we wouldn't be able to generate enough ATP in like postural muscles or anything like that. We wouldn't be able to do anything for any extended period of time. So each one of them has their own function, but they're all like so linked to each other that you can't get rid of one of them, even though we are taught that, oh, it's just this system, and then it's just this system, and then it's just this system. No, they're all feeding back on each other, and there's signals that are happening one way or the other, right? What's one of the old sayings is like fat burns in a carbohydrate flame.
Yeah, I
So
wonder about that. I get what they're trying to say.
yeah. And well, so the idea is, right, is that if you didn't have a glycolytic system, then you wouldn't be able to convert that pyruvate into oxaloacetate. And
you
if
don't have any intermediates in your
yeah, exactly. So it's and I'm sure if you have amino acids and stuff like that, they could probably be used in order to synthesize
just steal carbons from somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what ultimately what it is, just this massive just swapping of carbons here and there. But yeah, it's even from that perspective, if we do believe that's true, then fat metabolism wouldn't happen without carbohydrate metabolism also occurring at the same time. So everything is so interconnected that I think like if we try to pluck one thing out, or if we just try to isolate one thing, it's not actually isolating one thing. That's why when we do sprint interval training, if it was truly isolated, we would expect the phosphocreatine system and maybe a little bit of the glycolytic system to get better. But we've seen time and time again from like the Martin Gabala and Stu Phillips and them, you do sprint interval training and you get massive improvements to your mitochondria.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. I thought 10 to 30 seconds was only glycolytic and it was totally anaerobic. Like, no, it's not, because after it's A, oxygen's being used at all times, but B, the oxidative phosphorylation system is then what's being used to then replenish both of those systems afterwards.
Yeah, so EPOC.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if you look at McArdle's disease, which I find fascinating, so like they're genetic, and there's different types of it, but they're just genetically missing the enzyme to break down stored glycogen. And then you're like, okay, so you only really have blood glucose floating around, which is not very much. It's extremely tightly controlled. Most of the carbons for the glucose side would be from stored glycogen. And what's super fascinating about them is that they are incredibly exercise intolerant.
Right.
If you read the studies, like way more intolerant of intensity than you would imagine if glycolysis was only for high intensity stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah. So back to the Gavalia studies, like if you have somebody that's new, and I've gone back and forth on this too. If I remember right, some of the early studies he did was in pretty untrained people and had them do some pretty brutal, I don't know if it was like 30-second wing gates, I think he was having them do for repeats, and showed some pretty impressive adaptations in them. And I don't think their VO2 max was extraordinarily high. And I believe he said that the people in the study liked it so much that I think their lab kept a group of them just coming in to exercise as a follow-up, which was shocking to me because I thought, oh my God, like an untrained population, you're brutalizing these poor bastards. They're going to hate life and hate you. And he's like, no, they actually enjoyed it. So that's almost like an argument for starting with anaerobic training, maybe in an under-trained population.
Yeah, there's myself being an endurance coach and stuff. I get people telling me all the time, "Oh, you have to start with an aerobic base," which means
I said that a lot myself.
Yeah, and
I still say it.
and I like there is a lot of literature to support having a large aerobic base is very important for health, longevity, performance. We see it across the board. However, with the ability for your body to adapt, like if you're not doing anything, doing something is going to lead to an adaptation.
Oh yeah, something's better than nothing, no question.
Right. But you will get way more bang for your buck if you do high intensity stuff, which is then my argument is I work with primarily time limited individuals who I'm like, okay, well, if someone's training 3 days a week, you can't tell them just to do zone 2 stuff because they're not going to get better. They're just going to, it's just going to be the same. Cause when we're existing around, that it's like if you did zone 2 stuff and then you just did nothing for the next day and then zone 2 stuff and then nothing, you're not getting much of a spike in stress. Right.
Yeah.
So for a lot of those people, I'm like, okay, well, we can start with one high intensity training session. And I did this with a couple of my PT friends down in Bend. And I was having them do one VO2 max session per week. And then of course they would do like other stuff throughout the week. But over the course of 6 weeks, one of the guys, just because he hadn't been training very much, his VO2 max increased by 15%. Oh,
damn. That's good.
Yeah. And so And I don't think it would have been to the same extent if he was just doing easy stuff all the time, which is like kind of the recommendation. So it's okay. Well, it always comes back to you have to have a mixture of all of it. So, but people who if you're training 3 days a week, the other 4 days are essentially off days for you. Yeah. So you can probably get away with at least one, if not two, maybe three. I would start with one and then max out like the adaptations, but then you could definitely do two, like pretty hard, 30 seconds on, 4 minutes off. And you would get massive benefits across, because the bottom line is your body is only going to adapt to the stress that you place upon it. And running easy, walking, like those sort of things, yes, they're great for metabolic flux and like just a lot of other things.
But not bumping your VO2 max.
No, so don't get it twisted. Like you're not gonna get a massive VO2 max like a Tour de France cyclist by doing 2 zone 2 training sessions for 45 minutes per week. Like it's just not going to happen. However, you could get a higher VO2 max if you did 2 30-minute sessions of either sprint interval training or high intensity interval training, more along that anaerobic side like we're talking about, which is really interesting because then it targets the aerobic side. So
yeah, that's kind of the sneaky thing I did with I just called it a 6-minute progressive. So get up in the morning or whenever you want to do it, get on a rower, obviously make sure you don't have any mechanical limitations or whatever. And you basically you're trying to get a curve that looks like this. And then right about halfway or 2/3 of the way, it flattens out. And your max is, I don't know, I'd have to look up the numbers I ended up getting at. So maybe 85, 90% of max. You're getting close to it, but just for that very last little bump. And if you look at it, what ends up happening is you get almost about 3 minutes, 2 minutes of a VO2 max interval. Right. And then I have people do that up to 6 days a week. These are people who are normally relatively fit, already lifting, that type of thing. Yeah. And I came up with it myself just because I needed something to not watch my VO2 max drop, but my schedule was crazy. And I still wanted to lift. I didn't really want to do endurance stuff, but I knew if I did F all nothing, I would just go to crap anyway. And so I started adding that in the morning. This happened during COVID, actually. And I realized I'm like, oh, and I played around with different time domains and did too much, did too little, whatever. And the other part I found is that the 6 minutes, even if you go balls out, because you didn't really do a warm-up, there's still going to be this slow kind of increase up to the max. And because it's short enough, like you just limit whatever damage you would have done. You know what I mean? Like you can't, even if you just go balls out and mistime it, like you can't really do too much damage with that. And so it's a sort of a sneaky way of, can I get a little bit of these kind of VO2 max intervals programmed in over time? And, you know, it tends to work pretty good.
Yeah. And that's like another thing like we had initially talked about. But if you're doing such a small amount, because that's 3 minutes of VO2 max per day, you're accumulating. If you did it for six days a week, if you did it 7 days a week, you get 21 minutes of VO2 max development per week, and then the question is, well, as long as the stimulus is high enough to elicit some sort of stress, and then the rest of your day you can recover from that, and you can come back the next day and do a little bit better. There's a lot of different ways. You don't have to do the Norwegian 4x4.
Oh, that's my new pet peeve.
Oh my gosh. That's also like the worst workout to develop your VO2 max in terms of just how shitty it would feel.
Oh, it's horrible to do. It's really hard.
It's so awful. So it's no, there's 30-30s. There's 1 minute on, 1 minute off. There's 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. There's every iteration in between that. Or the 6 minute progressive sessions that you're talking about. There's a lot of different ways. The sprint intervals that we're talking about too, there's a lot of different ways to improve your cardiovascular system. And it doesn't have to just be purely having to like down 3 pre-workouts, psych yourself up, and still throw up afterwards, like feeling with that. So I'm just like, but those were the types of workouts we did as like kids. We never called it the Norwegian 4x4 method. It was mile repeats, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, dude, this isn't like some new thing that's all of a sudden been shown.
Repeats.
Yeah, do 800s, do 1200s, do 1600s, like all of that with equal rest. Like that's where I've been trying to explain like zoning and stuff and like what it targets. And first of all, like wherever you're working out, you're going to get some sort of bleed over to other adaptations, right? That's why you can do a 30-second sprint and it can make your VO2 max better.
Yep.
You're not actually doing VO2 max work per se, but because it's pretty close to your VO2 max, it's going to also raise the VO2 max. And like, this is where I then use the science to explain this is, well, we've looked at all these different iterations over the course of history where it's, you have like a 1-to-4 work rest ratio, 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, or maybe a 1-to-8 or 30 seconds on, 4 minutes off. And that's like your typical sprint. That's, of course, going to help with your sprint ability and then to some extent your VO2 max. If we slowly move to a 1-to-1 work rest ratio, that's going to more specifically target your VO2 max. But it's also, depending on how trained you are, going to have a little bit of bleed over to maybe your sprint ability and a little bit of bleed over to maybe your second threshold. Then if we keep moving and we go 2-to-1 and then we go 4-to-1 and then all the way up to 20-to-1 or 30-to-1, then we're targeting your second threshold. And then anything past that, you shouldn't really have to do intervals after 30-to-1 or something like that. Then you're targeting that like zone 2 sort of stuff. So it's like all those iterations are, well, where do they fall on the spectrum? And then what is the primary adaptation going to be? And how is that then going to help me be more functional with whatever sport I'm doing?
Yeah. And my biggest pet peeve is like on the Norwegian 4x4, most people who try to do that, I don't think they realize, and granted, 4 minutes is a little bit longer. It's not like 30 seconds or 60 seconds, but you have to be pretty trained to pull that off without seeing a massive output between interval 1 and 4. Like the people I see posting their actual outputs, I'm like, wow, you get like bonus points for me for gonadal fortitude, but between number 1 and number 4, like I've seen like 50% decrements.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so what are you really training at that point other than just pounding your dick in the ground?
Right. Yeah. You're just a masochist at that point, right? No, and that's what I tell people is like the pace or the power output, whatever it is that you should be targeting is if I had to do that, it should be equal across the board.
Yes.
So I would rather have
close.
somebody start, say, for example, like start at 300 watts if you're on a bike for 4 minutes. And if that's too easy, okay, bump it up to 315. But don't go 450 and then be at 250 at the end, because then at that point, you're probably not even getting like the bioenergetic adaptations. You're just already exhausted and you're just, like you said, pounding your dick into the ground at that point. Like you're spinning your wheels. It's not worth it at that point.
Yeah. And that's what I unfortunately see, especially on the anaerobic side, is you read something that'll say, oh, 30-30. So one of the little markers I have is if you're on the rower and you're, let's just say an average athlete, this is not elite standards. I'm still playing with the actual wattage. But if I took any athlete and I just threw a dart at the board and I said, okay, if you can hit a 30-30, so 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for 10 rounds and only have about a 5% decrement from round 1 to round 10, and you can average 300 watts, which I think is doable for people, that to me, that's pretty badass. And it doesn't look that bad on paper till you start doing it and hit round 3 and you're like, oh, son of a bitch. That's way harder than I thought.
And that's like with the endurance. In the endurance world, we have the stationary bikes, the ergs that can actually control the power. So you don't go in and you're not freewheeling it like on a C2 bike erg or like a rower or an assault bike or something like that. And it makes it actually a little bit easier to do the workout, because as long as you've done some sort of physiological testing or something like that, you'll have kind of a starting point. You just take whatever your last minute was, and then you just start there and you just see if you can do it. But when people hear the 4x4, the 30-30s or whatever it is, it's, oh, I'm supposed to go all out. Is like, yes, but all out is different if you're doing 10 seconds as hard as you can, or if you're repeating 30 seconds 10 times in a row, right? It's like, yes, it's still all out. Like when I run a 2-mile race, I'm trying to run as hard as I can across that 2-mile race. That's all out for me. But that looks a lot different when I'm doing 200 meters all out. Right. So and people, I think it's just hard to wrap your mind around it, especially with 30 seconds. Like, those 30-30s are very, like, some people the reason why they love them is because it's enough to be hard and then you can recover really fast. So some people can recover really fast from them and just keep doing them all day. But there is a time where you eventually, your heart rate's like 180, it's up there, and you're not getting much change with 30 seconds. It's like 180, 175. And then you're automatically right back up to 180. That's when you start to be like, oh boy, this is bad. So yeah, just be careful with your implementation of those sort of things. So like I said, I like to start lower and then build up from there.
Yeah, and in my brain, there's two ways you can go about it. What I like is have your output, which will take you a little while to figure out if you don't have testing or whatever. Just play with it. There's no, I don't think, magical number. You can use the Kurt Jensen profile, a percentage off of 2K, and there's other stuff you can use to figure it out. So start there, and then I just have people do open-ended rest. So I'd rather have them start at like a high output. They could do a biometric method. Okay, wait till your heart rate gets below 100. Okay, now you do your next one. So the goal there is I'm trying to get as much volume as I can because I'm protracting the time. I'm not stuck on this 1-to-1 ratio. And if you've already rested for 3 to 5 minutes and you can't hit close to that same power output again, you're done. It wasn't a rest issue. Like you've maxed out, in my opinion, the adaptations you could get for that day. Come back again. And then once you make it through 10 rounds, 12 rounds, whatever number, now you can either bump up the output or you can try to shorten the density. And usually I find people just like doing a little bit better output if they have time. But if they're super limited on time, I'll be like, great, that whole thing took you, whatever, 27 minutes. I'm making up numbers. Now, if you did the whole thing in 25 minutes, great. That's an improvement over time.
Right.
But I don't let them cut the output. The inverse, which my buddy Kenneth J has done too, is you can start with a 30-30 and you're going to hit 10 rounds, but by definition, the first ones have to be sub-max. Otherwise, you will not make it all the way through.
Right. Right. Well, it
Which
also
is fine.
Yeah. And it also depends on how you're measuring things as well, because there are some people, and I totally disagree with this, who are like, well, we don't start the timer until your heart rate gets into 90% of your max.
That doesn't make any damn sense to
I'm
me.
like, no, that doesn't matter, because from a force output perspective, if you're at 90% of your max, then you're there. Your body is just taking some time to catch up. Like your heart takes time to actually respond to that. Yeah. So that's just making it so that's so bad.
This is stupid.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, you have to accumulate 15 minutes of work at 90% or above, and it doesn't start until you get above that. I'm like, no, because sometimes my heart rate, say for example, like I was doing a lot of biking, like in the off season, like when I was doing trail running and stuff like that, and I was doing VO2 max bike work, and like I would do I would do 30-30s and other things like that. My heart rate did not get into the 90% until, I don't know, like halfway through, 75% of the way through. And then it's like, now I can start actually accumulating. It's like, no, that's not how it works. With all of the higher intensity stuff, like sprints and like 1-to-1 work rest ratio and probably above, and maybe 2-to-1 to some extent, use power output or some mechanical output like speed or wattage or whatever you want to do. It's because heart rate is such a lagging variable. It's not a good indicator of actually what your muscles are experiencing in that moment.
Yeah, to me, heart rate is good to track as a metric of cost and efficiency, right? So like, all things being equal, if you could complete 30-30 at 10 rounds at, let's say, 300 watts, and let's say your average heart rate was 165 versus athlete B, who's 177, which athlete do you want to play on your team? I want the one with the lower heart rate, because that's telling me, at least by some marker, they both did the same output. I would hedge that. Or if you compare those to yourself and you did it at the same work output, but you did it at an average of 10 beats per minute less. So I've got some data on this from doing like the 6-minute stuff.
Right.
To me, that's a better adaptation, because you've automatically gotten more efficient and your output was the same.
Yeah,
because
your performance is getting better.
You're just going to penalize yourself when you're more fatigued.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then it's also, there's something to say it's also harder to get your heart rate up when you're tired, It's
Yes.
also harder to get your power output up when you're tired. And most likely force production is probably driving those changes to cardiovascular system and
That
muscular
would be
system
my
and all
guess.
that. So yeah, it's, I don't like that way, like I said, of thinking about, oh yeah, we don't start until this heart rate, especially with those higher ends. But that's the importance of, okay, well, it's like at the beginning of your block, if you can handle 10 by 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off at 300 watts, yeah, measure your heart rate,
Yeah.
get a data point, and then do that workout for 6 weeks and then do it again. And your average heart rate is actually probably going to be lower.
Yep.
So that, and then that's an indicator that you're getting more fit.
Yeah. 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 Cool. I like that. To get closer to the end here, tell us about lactate. Why does lactate seem to be like this horrible, evil thing that everyone, how many years later is George Brooks? How many decades has he been talking about this? And
He's,
it still seems like people still hate lactate.
oh yeah, yeah. And again, this is one of those things where people are like, oh, like the lactic acid burn and stuff, and you go, well, actually,
Yeah.
it's not actually the lactate that's happening that's causing the burn in your legs. It could be misdirection of sodium potassium pumps, like it could be interference with like protons, it could be other things like that. That's a big can of worms. But the bottom line is, we are talking about anaerobic metabolism here, and within glycolysis, which is the breakdown of glucose, you have an end product. You have a 6-carbon glucose that gets broken into 2-3-carbon byproducts. So whether you want to say it's pyruvate or lactate, that's still up in the air for debate. But where that pyruvate can go is dependent on what's happening in the mitochondria. So if your mitochondria have adequate oxygen and the force output is enough, or the force output is
Low
that
enough.
it can continue to oxidize that pyruvate, then you're not going to get very much lactate being formed, at least from the perspective of getting into your blood.
Yeah. You're more on the air quote aerobic side.
Right. Yes. But when you start to transition to the anaerobic side, you start to use more, you start to break down more of that glucose, and the end product, that pyruvate, actually starts to get converted into lactate. That lactate, what can happen with it is it can go out to other muscle cells and be taken up by the mitochondria and used for aerobic metabolism, or it can then be shipped into the blood and then it circulates around and it can make it to the heart, it can make it to the liver for some processes, it can make it to the brain and be used there. But what happened was, I think this is in like the 1800s, right? They were taking blood samples from like these stags that were being hunted, that were obviously running away from us. And then they would go kill them. And then they would notice that there was a lot of lactate in the blood. And like the only time that the stag is going to actually be within range of being shot is when it gets tired. So there was this like idea that lactate was the cause of that fatigue because it was related to it, the correlation of it.
Associated.
Yes. Yeah. So there was an association between lactate and fatigue. And now what we're understanding is that lactate is a signaling molecule. It's really important for aerobic metabolism to continue, especially under more anaerobic conditions in a sense. And the reason why the lactate is being made is because of a higher reliance on glycolysis. But what's actually happening, where that fatigue, where those where that acidosis is actually coming from, is from the breakdown of ATP at the muscle. And it's the handling of those hydrogen ions, those protons, that actually shifts and then can interfere with contractile elements and other things like that. So that's a completely different sort of can of worms, fatigue mechanisms and other things like that. But essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I think about it, is at low exercise intensities, when you're pretty aerobic, essentially most of those protons are going to be sequestered into the mitochondria. They're going to be buffered by carnitine and other things like that. But as you start to exercise harder and harder, more protons are going to be created from the breakdown of ATP. And at the same time, we're still going to be making more lactate just because we're breaking down more glucose. But the hydrogens eventually start to slip out into the blood. And then when there's an accumulation within the muscle, you get changes to enzyme functionality, like I said, hindrances to the contractile elements, actin and myosin. And then that's where we start to see that fatigue starting to arise. And more lactate makes it into the blood, but it's really the hydrogens that are making it into the blood and being buffered that are really the cause of the issue.
Yeah, I agree. Like how I explain to people is like when you run glycolysis really hard, and at the end of the day, you produce a lot of lactate and you produce about the same amount of hydrogens. Probably not exactly the same, but they're like a 1-for-1 sort of at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the lactate is just this proxy we use for actually hydrogen ions, which unfortunately gets made even worse by lactate testing because everybody knows lactate testing is usually pretty brutal. It feels horrible. And so I think that unfortunately further perpetuates this thing of we want to stay below our lactate threshold because lactate's this evil thing. And look, we just measured it here in the lab and we know when you get too much of it, like performance breaks down and all that is true, but it's like guilt by association. And it
Right.
just so happens it's easier to measure lactate than to measure the pesky hydrogen ions that are floating around screwing shit up.
It's easier to measure lactate than it is to measure the CO2 that's being produced, right?
That too, yeah.
Because that's another one. You would have to have a portable CO2 device, which we still really don't have. There's other devices now, right, that we were talking about offline with the Moxie and other NIRS devices and stuff that they give you a good indication of what's actually happening in the muscle and they measure oxygen consumption. So when oxygen consumption rates change, that's like a way of monitoring where bioenergetic systems are shifting and stuff like that. But commercially available devices for those I've only been out for the last, I don't know, 14 years, 10 to 14 years. And so the first thing that people did is they were like, oh, well, we know that there's a correlation between lactate and fatigue. And if we can measure it, then we can get an idea of when you're going to fatigue, right? And unfortunately, it requires you to draw blood and do other things like that. And I got asked during my master's to go give a lecture on how to do lactate testing to some nutrition students. And I hadn't really done much lactate stuff ever because I was more on the NIRS side of things. And I was like, oh, why would I need lactate testing when I have a device that kind of tells me where all the breakpoints are, just light rather than blood? So I went down in the lab and I got a Lancet and I was just like sitting there, just like freaking poking my finger. I was like, ah, son of a gun. Like my fingers just hurt. Were so tender to the touch for the next like week. And I couldn't get good data anyways because I was like, I wasn't wiping it properly. And then I was squeezing my finger and I was doing all this other stuff. And like, it was saying my lactate was like 7 at like rest. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not true. I'm not like, I'm a fairly fit, healthy individual. I was like, I'm pretty sure don't have some sort of ketoacidosis or something going on or some liver failure. I don't know, but it's a lot. Yeah. Guilt by association. And I think it's just a lot more hassle than it's really worth in a sense.
Yeah. And it's difficult. Like I remember we taught this at one of the Carrick Institute courses. So my buddy Freddie's and Kenneth J and I are sitting around the table the night before. We got all of our lactate testing and we're like, we've done it before, but I don't know if Freddie's had, but we're like, we should probably test this now just to make sure everything works good. Cause it's the hallmark whenever you do a big presentation, like stuff you've used before, just shit won't work.
Yeah.
So I've learned enough to like at least test it the night before. And the Lancets they gave us, because someone else ordered them, were horrible. And you're just sitting around all trying to poke your own finger and not enough blood would come out and then too much. And then you had to make sure the device was cowled. And then I freaking hate needles, so I'm sweating profusely, and so I'm getting sweat in the droplet, and then having to wipe it off, and then oh crap, I just screwed up one of these testing strips at the time. It was like $4 or something. Like, oh shit. So
it's not worth it. But if you do get it done, it's not. The lactate is an indicator of what's going on in your muscles and how your muscles are dealing with the exercise and stuff like that. It's not what's causing your legs to burn and feel fatigue and other things like that. It's just like you said, I like that guilty by association.
And it's the old exercise phys thing of, well, we did this because we could measure it.
Right.
Why do we, even now we have a lot more data on strength training, but that's all probably relatively recent, especially compared to aerobic training. And it's because, we could put a treadmill in the lab and measure stuff aerobically, like trying to do anaerobic stuff with hoses with the big old metabolic hearts and all this other stuff is just not that conducive. So a lot of what we know is limited by the technology of what we could use to even investigate certain
Mm.
things, which has obviously gotten a lot better over the years.
Yeah.
So if someone, as we wrap up, if someone is doing, say, the 30-30 protocols or 60 seconds on and then some time off, how much of their improvement in that over time do you think is from an intrinsic increase in the buffering system, like intramuscular carnosine, etc., versus other adaptations going on?
Huh. Another really good question. And it's like we know that people can take things, right?
So beta alanine will be combined
yeah.
with histidine to form intramuscular carnosine, which is helpful as a buffer agent.
So I don't know what the specific adaptations are, but I imagine, especially in the beginning, there's probably time courses, right? Because one of the things that I looked at during my PhD was like, how like muscle, not like specific enzyme protein synthesis rates and those sort of things. And it was all over the board in terms of like how long it would take one to reach significance and then how long it went away and like other things. But I do think that because I'm trying to think of I think in the very beginning, it's just this like sledgehammer effect of like, I like to think of the movie Inside Out, if you've ever seen that, where
Yeah.
like the first time something bad happens, the red lights are going, everything's burning in the background. That's your body when you exercise for the first time in a really long time. Is just,
like, oh shit.
yeah, everything is burning to the ground. And as long as you recover enough from it, then, your house is then going to be bigger. And so it's really hard to say, oh, well, is it because of the buffering capacity or is it because of increases to mitochondrial function? There's probably something to say that there's probably a stimulus for capillary expansion, but that takes a little bit longer.
Too.
Yeah. So, and then there's also like changes to lactate shuttling and all of those sort of things. So like the time course is hard to say, but I think to some extent, you're definitely going to get better buffering capacity. You're definitely going to get better communication between the different systems. So one of the reasons why having larger mitochondria is good is because then if you have an energetic stress down here, now you can react down here if you have larger mitochondria because you just communicate it all the way down the system. So you're going to get bigger, you're going to get larger mitochondria. But there's also a time course of those adaptations. And I think it comes down to, well, what's the easiest way to get adaptations to begin with? Like when we do like heat training and other things like that, we see plasma volume expansion is almost always the first one because it's easy for your body to hold on to more liquid. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most efficient way to adapt to the stimulus.
Right. And then from a cellular perspective, and I'll talk to mitochondria because that's what I know a little bit more. It seems it's easier to fold the inner membranes of the mitochondria first, so make more cristae, or actually, I don't know which one comes first here, but fold the mitochondria cristae, actually get all your mitochondrial enzymes and put them together into like super complexes and stuff. So it's easier to bring stuff together that's already there, right? As opposed to making more membranes.
Right.
But then the next step is, okay, well, now that we folded everything and we've gotten past that adaptation phase, well, now we got to start making new and making more of them. Yeah. And depending on how large of a structure that is, it's like, oh, well, maybe the enzymes start to be made first, and then the lipid membrane structure then gets made second. And then, so there's definitely a time course to all of this. And that was a long-winded way of basically saying that I would imagine like carnosine and buffering and other things like that is probably on the early to mid sort when you start to make more of those enzymes and proteins. And if you're providing beta alanine and those sort of things, then it's probably a little bit faster. But yeah, you're definitely getting better at buffering, whether it's buffering in the mitochondria to sequester more protons or more carnosine being created for intracellular buffering or more sodium bicarbonate buffering within the blood. All of those things it'd be a fascinating thing to look at, right? Is what is the time course of all of this? Just have somebody do your 6-minute workout every single day. can't do a muscle biopsy every single day. That would be pretty miserable.
But
Something
some
along those
country
lines.
could.
You could do like a micro biopsy. I'm pretty sure like you could get, you wouldn't, the challenge is
Would
like
you get enough though?
yeah, that's the problem is you probably wouldn't unless you
Yeah.
did some crazy omics techniques, which don't need a ton, but you still need to start with a decent amount of cell in the beginning. And then you can slowly sift out like the mitochondria and other things like that.
Yeah. The only way I thought around of it, I don't know if you've seen, I think Cal's talked about this, Cal Deitz has talked about this, or maybe Jim Snyder did. The theory of a lactate trap. So you would do high output Wingate stuff. And let's say if you're trying to get more of a local adaptation in your legs, you basically put the athlete in a position where they're contracting the legs almost in like an isometric after doing high lactate stuff. The theory is you're trying to stop or sequester venous return or outflow, just like a temporary blood flow restriction. So I wondered if you could have one group do that, one group that doesn't. And then could you, the group doing the lactate trap, could you do a local lactate level instead of doing the finger or the ear or something like that? But again, you're back to, we're assuming lactate is approximate for hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ions are actually doing the buffering. I've tried it. It's freaking miserable to do. So I'm thinking, man, this better be one hell of an adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or did I just make my life hell for no reason?
Right. And I think like you've talked about in the past, like with like cold exposure, for example, it's like you probably don't need to even think about doing something like that until you've done some sprint interval training just on its own.
For God's sakes, train first.
Yeah. You don't need to get the BFR bands and and then oh my gosh, this would be awful. So what you would do is you would do a 30-second sprint on the bike. You'd have your BFR bands on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you'd have those on.
Yeah.
Do your sprint, then get into an isometric.
Yep.
And then release them, and then you'd probably throw up.
Yeah.
It's just battle of who can feel the worst after a workout because that's what's going to be the big change.
Yeah.
But no,
then it's just the nutrition contest. It's like back to the Bulgarian system.
yeah. As long as whoever can survive is going to be the strongest out of all of this, and it's just. No, there's a better way. That's why we have science. That's why we have other things like that. And the answer to all of that is it's like start with the sprint stuff. I think if you're not doing anything, do something, whether it's like the 6-minute ramp up that you're talking about. If you don't have much time, some 30-30s, you could even do 30 seconds on, 4 minutes off if you're trying to do a little bit more of that anaerobic sort of development and stuff like that. But for people who are lifting and who don't do cardiovascular stuff, do it, because if it may not help you directly with your ability to move heavy weight, but it'll definitely help your recovery ability, your ability to get more volume in, and those sort of things as well. So it's like you can't have a totally atrophied heart and expect to be able to recover from like tons and tons of volume and strength training.
Yeah. Contrary to what one guy keeps hitting me up on Instagram all the time is, yes, there is such a thing as cardiac development. No, it's not only muscular development. Yes, VO2 max is a test, but it is still useful. So there's appears to be some people still out there, because I've gotten more than one email about that but you're just training the muscular system. It's only muscular adaptations. I'm like, of course you're still training the muscular system, but just like a deadlift is going to emphasize different muscles than a bench press. Like we can emphasize stress into different areas into the system by changing these wide variety of parameters that we do. So yeah. Last anaerobic words of wisdom.
Nothing is purely anaerobic and nothing is purely aerobic. That's always it's a combination in a gray zone transition area of everything. But that was me. That was the PhD. Well, actually, but in all actuality, it's like train for like what you're trying to develop. And if you don't train one thing and you neglect one thing quite a bit, then you probably stand to make a lot of adaptations in that one thing with fairly minimal work as well. So like if you're scared or just hesitant to do like aerobic work, even though you consider yourself more of an anaerobic athlete, you probably don't have to actually do that much in order to get good adaptations from it.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful part. What I tell people too is, and I've talked to Kenneth J about this. You mentioned on our last podcast, I think, if you just wanted to stay even on aerobic stuff and probably even improve for some people, I don't know what you've seen, but I've seen 3 sessions of 20 minutes a week. You're probably pretty damn good, assuming there's some intensity applied to it. I don't think you're gonna destroy your VO2 max numbers doing that. I think there's probably better ways of doing it, but if you only just did that, I've seen a lot of people make good progress and 100% maintain a lot of stuff with literally about an hour a week, which I don't
Yeah.
think is crazy.
No, and that the caveat there is like with some intensity. Because
Yes,
if you're
100%.
if you're just doing easy stuff,
You can't do
then
zone 2 there.
yeah, exactly. You can't do 20 minutes of zone 2 3 times a week and expect to really maintain like higher end. But yeah, that's actually really a really good point, because there's studies that look at the maintenance of VO2 max and stuff after like training blocks, and you can maintain VO2 max on 50% of the work that you did for 6 to 8 to even 10 weeks or something like that.
Time.
So a long time. And if you're just looking to get enough, like the minimal effective dose here isn't very high, especially if you're willing to add a little bit of that high intensity. Like I said, one of my studies that I did during my PhD was, well, we wanted to see like how much mitochondrial function we could induce by just doing it's essentially 20 minutes every other day, because it was 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and 30% increase in mitochondrial function from sedentary individuals. And we know that results in a higher VO2 max. So 20, 30 minutes a day, every other day is can be a very effective workout. You might actually improve too if you haven't done it very much.
Yeah. Awesome. So where can people find you? I know you got a lot of great stuff on Instagram. You work with athletes, especially endurance athletes. You do some, I think, in-person stuff out in Oregon, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So I'm in the Central Oregon area. I have a mobile physiology lab. So if you're in the Central Oregon area, hit me up and we can coordinate testing for either your athletes, your gym, I was even thinking about doing employees and other things like that.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really cool thing to offer for people. If you are just wanting to see what I'm all about, Instagram is my hub of operations. So it's at Dr. Phil Batterson. And you can, if you are an endurance athlete or just somebody who's trying to overcome like overtraining, had issues with injuries in the past, like those sort of things, I take a very individualized, holistic approach. So it's not just training, it's training, nutrition, sleep, recovery, those sort of things with all the athletes that I work with. So drop me a line over on Instagram. And then I do have a podcast with almost 100 episodes. I'm not really, I haven't been really making a ton of episodes lately, but Dr. Mike has been on a number of times and we've had some really good conversations over there. So that would be the Critical Oxygen podcast on Spotify and on Apple, if you guys want to check it out.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I would highly encourage anyone, especially if they're in the area, if you can ever do in-person testing and everything like that, it is super, super useful. So awesome. Thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for having me.
Thank you. Awesome, man. I know you ran over, but thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that was great. That was super info. I appreciate it. That was good.
Yeah, thanks. Every time we talk, I'm like, oh man, I hope I'm giving him the stuff that he wants.
I just like asking all the hard questions I don't have answers to.
Yeah. And then I'm over here just like, oh shit, I don't know, actually. Like,
I'm like, I don't know. That's shit I wonder about. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
I can't find anything to say either way.
Right. But it's fun to have those conversations. So I always appreciate talking to you about this sort of stuff. And I also appreciate all the words of wisdom and stuff with the email stuff and the business and the marketing and all that. Again, it's like for me, I have to be very compartmentalized with what I focus on in order. So I was focusing on like the Instagram stuff and all of that. And now I'm like, okay, I think I'm slowly getting to the point where I'm like, I really want to start working with more local athletes. So I'm going to just like continuously reach out to like businesses in the area. And I was sitting at PT today and I was like, man, I need to get in with like PT clinics, like doctors clinics. There's a bunch of functional medicine clinics around where I'm at.
Oh yeah.
And have a contract with them where they pay me say $2,000 a month. And then I just come down and offer testing for people, like VO2 max testing and like those recommendations. Cause like those companies as a whole, if they're preaching better health and optimization and other stuff like that, is okay, well, probably it should start with you guys, then offer these benefits to your employees. And so that's just an idea I'm floating around. And I think it would be pretty cool to be able to do that. Cause then it's, every Friday I go, or it's like one Friday a month, I go to these guys, do testing. One Friday a month, I go to these guys, do testing, and it's all in one place. And I'm not trying to find a bunch of different people or anything like that. And then hopefully then that would result in then more clients and stuff, because I don't know, how do you like, this is probably a huge can of worms, but the way that I think about VO2 max testing isn't just, oh, you get your numbers and then you're good to go. It's like, okay, well, where's your VO2 max in relation to your second threshold, in relation to your first threshold? And then from there, we can actually target do you focus on VO2 max or second threshold? And then is your aerobic base high enough? And that's actually how I can implement my training, especially for these endurance athletes that I work with. And that's something that I hadn't really seen or just heard discussed, because a lot of it's just like, well, what's your VO2 max? Okay, it's too low. You got to get it better. And you're like, well, it depends on the relationship of like where you're at in the season, like other things like that. And that's what people take away from people talking about VO2 max, is that, oh, a VO2 max test, that's all you get. So
Yeah, that's my pet peeve. Like I've had so many discussions with other people, because they'll ask me like, oh, well, what protocol do you use for your VO2 max? I'm like, who am I testing? What do they want to know? What is there? Because yes, I will probably generally use a RAM test, but I've done just a straight up 2K on a rower for someone who is more interested in their 2K time and pacing. That's going to be more specific to them. No, I'm not going to get low end fat oxidation and a crossover point and all that stuff, but it's not relevant to them. That wasn't their question.
Right.
So I usually, if it's a RAM test and it's appropriate, I actually am just so stupid. I actually put everything in Excel and I graph stuff out, and I'm looking for the area where you suck. And a lot of times you'll see a change in RER, you'll see a spike in respiratory rate. It won't be smooth. Like you'll see these discontinuities, and then I'll be like, okay, let me guess. You don't do any zone 2 stuff and you do no threshold work. Oh my God, how did you know?
Yeah,
because everything in that area sucks.
Yeah. That's like when I test CrossFitters and it's, oh, well, your VO2 max and your second threshold are actually really high, but then your first threshold is at 100 watts.
Yeah, it's ridiculously stupid.
I'm like, okay. Yeah, so we do the same thing in a sense. Okay, that I like that. I'm going to...
Because to me, the point of the test is, yes, I'm going to drive. And to me, if you go back, okay, what's the definition of VO2 max? Probably 2 minutes at steady state where oxygen levels have plateaued, right? To me, if you hit that and we didn't induce a shit ton of fatigue before, it's still a VO2 max. Now, may it be different in different testing, different protocols? I agree. But most people are looking for just that baseline of like, where are they at? So I'll still give them a VO2 max, but the next question they're going to ask is, well, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
If you only have a VO2 max, unless it sucks horribly and they need a bigger one, if it's 30 and you want to be an endurance athlete, well, yeah, you need to up your VO2 max. If it's somewhat reasonable, then it's okay, but you didn't design the test to answer the question that they really have. So what good was the test?
Right, because now you just have VO2 max and then you don't have any of the other information. Yeah, and that's so I have an athlete down in San Diego. He's a High Rocks guy, and we want to get some testing done. So I've been like emailing people, and I'm just like, well, what sort of protocol do you guys use? Like, how do you do it? What sort of interpretations? Can I get all the data? Because I want to be able to interpret it. What sort of devices do you use? And the one of them I've gotten, they've had good answers. They're like, well, it depends on, I don't really understand the difference between, if you're doing like lactate threshold testing, you typically, the stages must have to be longer, right? In order to get like some steady state lactate.
In my opinion, yes, but that's even debatable. I think it's the total time of what you're doing. So to me, if I'm doing real lactate testing, 30 seconds on the low end is probably too short.
Yeah.
You can get some there, but I would look at 60 seconds, and I even do 180-second one.
Okay. Yeah, because
it also depends, are you testing during or only after? If they're like on a rower or a skier, what the fuck am I going to do? Stop it in the middle and start poking them?
Yeah, but that's one of the challenges that like, well, do you pause between?
Correct.
And then it's, so that's what they were saying. They were like, well, we do first and second threshold, and then we ramp it up. And I'm just like part of me is just like, okay, this is why another reason why lactate threshold testing is dumb. It's like, well, if you're measuring, like, just give me the VO2 max test with CO2 and O2, and I'll be able to just like decipher like where
that's what I do, and stick
first and second threshold are.
I have all the data that I need, other than I can't talk to you in terms of lactate.
Right. Yeah, that is literally the only thing. But and it's so frustrating because especially in the running world, it's so inundated with
I know.
lactate talk that it's just, so basically I just call it breakpoint 1 and breakpoint 2, or your first and second floor, and then we can talk about it, right? Because okay, yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain on that real quick, because that is something that I want to do moving forward. And I think that is a very useful way of actually using physiological assessment rather than just being like, yep, here's your VO2 max. That's really all they care about. Because that's what people get frustrated over when they go into a lab and then they just get first threshold, second threshold, and VO2 max, and that's it. And then and then it's like, well, what do I do with it? That's the big question.
Yeah, and even then, there's arguments as, do you use the Dmax method in order to measure it, or what system do you use to even measure the freaking thing that you're looking at?
2 millimole and 4 millimole is the popular one. Get out of here. I had a woman approach me on Instagram. She was like, yeah, I did a lactate test and they said I didn't have a second lactate threshold. It's like, what? How? What? Did you go to failure on the test? And she was like, oh yeah, like I couldn't run any faster, so they stopped the test and stuff, but my lactate never went over 3 millimole.
What?
And then I was like, okay, that's interesting. So what happened? So I asked her about her nutrition and stuff. So first of all, she was like on a ketogenic diet. Oh. She was in a caloric deficit. And so I was just like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
And these guys are trying to tell her that she didn't have like a second threshold. I was just like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about, because if you failed, you absolutely were above second threshold.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And even then, I just go back to simple terms, right? If the graph is doing this and it starts to become exponential, no matter what thing we're looking at, okay, right at that break point where it becomes exponential, we should stay below that. How about that?
Yeah. Easy as that.
But then people get mad and they're like, but you don't know what you're doing. You're not using this. You didn't use the Bruce Ramp protocol from the ACSM text in 1997.
Well, that's like one of the things that does also frustrate me is people are like pride themselves on, I use the exact same protocol for every single person, so then I can compare each person to each other. And I'm just like, that matters way less than comparing somebody to themselves. So make a test that you can repeat. And it's so for me, that's in make sure the test is between 7 and 15 minutes long based on like the recommendations that we have, like all this other stuff. And it's people, and that's where I'm still encouraged, because it's gotten more popular, like the VO2 max testing, but people still have no idea what the hell they're doing. So
that's my first question I asked now. Okay, I did VO2 max. Cool. How long was your test?
Yeah.
5 minutes.
6 minutes.
It's probably a shitty test. Sorry. Hate to piss on your leg and tell you it's raining, but
yeah. You probably shouldn't have gone to them. Yeah.
Or you're really detrained.
Yeah. Well, but even then it's like,
even if they were really and set to where your ability is.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I try to tell people. But then they're like, yep, we got to get as many VO2 max tests done a day. I'm like, all right, you're screwing yourself over, because these just aren't high quality tests.
Yeah. And the last thing I ask for people is ask the person there to give you a spreadsheet of all the raw data.
Yes.
Because more than once, like one guy came back, he's like, my VO2 max is 63. I was like, what the? Last time you were tested, you were 46, and that was 8 weeks ago, and you weren't doing VO2 max stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, lab told me. I'm like, okay, get us a copy of all the raw data. So we get all the thing, and we look at just the O2 line, and there was one number of 63, but one number, I don't know what average they were using, but basically the machine belched and stuck out a number of 63.
Yeah.
He was actually at 49 if you actually graphed it out.
When you graph it and average it.
The algorithm looked for only one single data point and was written to see what is the max point in this column, and just randomly threw out that number. So did it happen? Yes. But what I would not say that is VO2 max.
No. Not sustainable.
No. Well, man, well, thank you so much. I will let you know once this is out. All the best, buddy.
Yeah, let me know. Tag me if you do any promotions and stuff like that, like on Instagram, and I'll share it. And other than that, if you ever want me to come back on and talk, I'm always willing to talk shop with you.
Yeah, we'll do. And enjoy the big wedding and enjoy your time away.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Awesome. See you, buddy.
Right. Yeah, bye. See you, Mike.
Okay, so as promised, here is some of the super geeky stuff that we moved towards the end, because I thought it was still relevant, but wanted to give you all background so everyone can understand what the hell we're actually talking about here. So if you enjoy this topic and really geeky stuff, you will enjoy this last section here. Thank you so much.
I just talked to, is the guy's name Chris Lockwood? Does that
Oh,
name ring a
yeah.
bell? Yeah.
I love Chris. I just
Yeah.
sent him a message today.
That's awesome. Yeah, him and I met up because they just purchased some Moxies for some studies that they're doing.
Yeah, I sent him
And
over to Roger when I
yeah,
was
yeah,
down.
yeah. He was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, Mike Nelson sent us over to Roger. I was like, oh, that's a crazy small world because I'm about to talk to Mike tomorrow.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. So yeah, I was excited to talk to him and see what those guys got going on. Is NutraBolt the overarching company for Cellucor and C4 and all of them?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was trying to make the connection and I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, so he's been there for a while now, and last time we went through Austin, we got to stop in and see the new facility and got a tour, and I think I'm okay to put up the pictures now and stuff because I think it's public knowledge
Oh
now.
yeah,
But yeah, it's a freaking amazing facility. It's so cool, and he's got his
yeah.
own little lab in there with the Biodex and Dexa, and I was talking to him about it. I'm like, hey, you ever looked at SMO2? He's like, someone else just mentioned that the other day. I said, oh,
Right.
well, go talk to Roger. He'll hook you up. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be cool. It'll be interesting to see if they can actually detect changes because
Yeah.
I recommended for them looking more at like THB and THB response. Cause if they're looking at like vasodilation, which is what they're looking for.
Yeah. Do you think that's pretty reliable on Moxie? Or is
I
it
think
relative?
it's definitely relative.
Yeah, that's
And
my interpretation too.
yeah, it's Roger said he kind of kicks himself for labeling it like milligrams per deciliter or whatever.
It's a weird unit too.
Yeah, but it's the same as if you were to go get a blood test with total hemoglobin and stuff like that.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
so some people take that and they're like, "Oh, does this mean that's what I have like in my blood?" He's no, it's like blood volume underneath the sensor, and you can interpret like decreases meaning
Up or
that blood
down.
volume is going down, increases as blood volume going up, and that's like we generally steer people away from using THB too much just because you're opening a big can of worms when you start to get into that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I remember talking to James Serby.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I remember talking to him quite a bit about it in the past. And if you talk to, and I'm sure this has happened to you too, like the ultra hardcore NEARS researchers, they're like, it's all bullshit, all the calculations. And I'm like, in my experience, like it is a relative per session, per individual. Like I look at it like exactly what you said. Is it going up? Is it staying level? Or is it going down? Like that
Yeah.
to me has been relatively reliable. And that's I don't know, my sort of interpretation, but I could
Yeah.
be wrong on that.
No, and I think SMO2, I would say, is much more like from a scientific perspective, backed as being more reliable.
Yes.
It's the THB is still, yeah, it's use the trends. And that's the same thing with the SMO2. Like when people try to compare, like they try to compare like individuals to each with SMO2, and they're like, oh, it's such a high variation. It's, yeah, because everyone's got different regulation going on.
Yeah.
That's
It'll change on day by day basis too, I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a ton, but it will.
Yeah, it'll change day by day. And we have some hypotheses in house that could be related to fatigue, hydration levels, like other things like that. Slight changes in the positioning because Moxie is more robust in terms of its sensitivity to those things can lead to 5%, 10% changes like in the number. So, but as long as you're getting close, then you can generally rule out that the placement is the issue. And then, what I've been using it for is I do a lot of warm up tracking. So I'll do something that's like really easy, 5-10 minutes, like everybody tells you to do. And then I do some accelerations. And with those accelerations, I track SMO2 and performance. So like power output. And it's really quite interesting and RPE, how my RPE relates to my ability to decrease my SMO2. And then as SMO2 kind of gets closer and closer to itself, the top and the bottom, that's like when I know I'm actually like pretty tired. And it's just a nice metric to have to be like, yep, my muscles are saying I'm tired. My power output's saying I'm tired. My RPE is also saying I'm tired. So everything across the board is actually like confirming that.
Yeah. I've done this, but actually I probably never asked anyone about it. So I have this thing I call like HDR, human dynamic range.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger range you can have in pretty much most scenarios I've thought of is better. If I
Mm-hmm.
have faster heart rate recovery, I could hit a peak and I can come back down. HRV, if I can probably hammer someone with a high stimulus, I probably want them to go a little bit sympathetic, but I want them to come back to baseline ideally the next day. SMO2, if I can get on there and warm up and do whatever to see what my absolute max is, say it's 85%, and I really hammer it like 30-second wind gate or something like that that I know is going to drop. Exactly what you said. I look at my RPE, how many watts average was I able to hit? And then on good days, RPE is the same or okay, watts are higher, and it seems like I can desaturate harder. For other days where I'm just, I don't know, today kind of blows, like I can't quite get that top number as high, but it seems like I just can't desaturate as low as what I can on a good day. Is that what you guys have seen?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been testing with like the warm up stuff. And yeah, I love that like the dynamic range is really what we're looking at
Right.
overall. Is the high going up, is the low going down? And I was talking, are you familiar with Brett Kirby over at Nike?
I know who he is. That's it.
Yeah.
I've never met him.
So they use Moxie quite often, and I've had some
Mm.
conversations with him, and he said that he doesn't have any testing or like specific testing or publications with this, but the individuals he works with, the bigger their dynamic range, the better their performance generally is.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too. And
Yeah.
it seems like people who are not as trained, and maybe it's just an effort thing, maybe it's an efficiency thing, who knows? Like their top end, I haven't noticed a huge difference across the board. Like it'll be different, but I've noticed a big difference on they just can't drive and desaturate
Mhm.
super hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's generally, we see that with sedentary individuals. And then you also, really interestingly, there's a subset of endurance athletes, like more along the lines of like ultra distance runners, just some ultra distance runners, some Ironman athletes, and they're typically female
Hmm.
who their SMO2 will go up to 80. And then no matter how hard they hit it, it'll go down to 75. And we've measured those
Really?
tissue thickness. Yeah,
What?
it's like almost like their cardiovascular system can provide so much blood that their mitochondria just never can just outstrip it.
Wow. And I thought
So
seeing people couldn't get to 50 was bad.
yeah, no, it is wild. And then we've also like with that, you're like, oh, adipose tissue thickness is always the first thing you think of, and that's
Yeah.
fine. You move it around to different areas, and they still can't do it. Oh, and the ones that I've tested who have been like the least like in terms of dynamic range, they're the ones that do a lot of zone 2 training. They were
Yep.
swimmers growing up, which is really interesting. And I don't
Oh,
know if I'm just reading
weird.
into it a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
But all of that put together is, and I haven't had an athlete personally that I've worked with that I can test this hypothesis on. But what I would do if I was like actually coaching them is I would have them do sprint interval training so that they could really
Hmm.
stimulate the desaturation. Cause I think a lot of it is probably driven by an overdeveloped cardiovascular system. And then in underdeveloped mitochondria, they're still obviously there and they're still obviously highly functional. They just need to be pushed a little bit more, probably because they don't do hardly any sprinting.
Yeah. What about this thought? I've only had one person and I kind of lost track of them to be honest. So I haven't been able to test this out much, but my thought is I would actually put them on like a leg extension or something where I know I'm going to get some type of semi-occlusion, and then I
Mm,
would RPR the crap out of it because I've noticed in some people the muscle contraction, like their rec fem and muscles in that area will test weaker. Again, manual muscle test, take it for what it's worth.
right.
But once we get that going, that seems to help. And then I would actually start doing blood flow restriction because my
I
brain
was
goes
just thinking
to,
that.
I'm just going to hammer anything again to get that thing to start desaturating and to get a higher level of muscle contraction. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's yeah, the like it because it also could be a strength issue, recruitment issue,
Right, that's what
those
I
sort
was
of
thinking
things.
too. Yeah.
Which is why it's so interesting. It's like I always approach things from like the bioenergetic side of things, but it's also you have to remember the exactly like what you're saying is it's also contraction strength. So we might just need to get them stronger.
Yeah.
But those might be the individuals that we don't necessarily want to get super, super strong, because if what they're doing doesn't require an insane amount of force output, we wouldn't want to have like artificial, or like we wouldn't want to have them strong enough or so strong that they're occluding and then essentially accelerating the oxygen use there.
So would you then, so my thought with that is I would monitor like SMO2 on like a zone 2 or zone 3 on a bike, or something that is very typical of their sport, or even running, just to make sure, like you said, I'm not crushing their efficiency. And now they're becoming like I know Evan Pycon's talked a lot about this too, like the CrossFitters who have maybe the most muscle hypertrophy, maybe they contract the muscles so hard that they get so much occlusion.
Right.
That's good for the max strength events, but really sucks when you do long metcons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
No, interesting.
Huge thanks to Dr. Phil Batterson for coming back on to the podcast here. We'll link to his previous show. Massive thanks to him for all the great information here. Make sure to check out all the great stuff he's got on the old Instagram and everywhere else. And if you are anywhere near him in Bend, Oregon, I would highly recommend you seek him out, get some in-personal testing. Whenever you can get that stuff done, it is extremely beneficial to have your own data. Again, if you're in the Minnesota area or interested in flying in here, I also do metabolic heart assessments, Moxie work, NOx, pretty much whatever you need. But drop me an email, make sure I'm home and around, etc. And I just do that on an as-needed basis. And we've got sponsors from this show. Check out our friends over at Rogue. If you're interested in picking up a Concept 2 rower or the Rogue Echo bike, those are my two favorite pieces of equipment for old school cardiovascular training. If you're interested in metabolic hearts, check out my friends at Pinoe. Just drop me a note. I'll put you in touch with them, or tell them Dr. Mike T. Nelson sent you. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have the flexible meathead cardio course, the level 1, which is aerobic, level 2, which is anaerobic. Will be open again. I don't have the exact dates yet, because we do have the physiologic flexibility cert, which will open up October 13th. But yeah, so hop onto the newsletter. Once I get all that sorted out, the PhysFlex cert is up next, and you will be the first to know on the cardiovascular courses also, which has had some really good feedback. So thank you as always for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. Big thanks to Dr. Phil again for all the great information. Check out all of his stuff. Give us a like, the download button, subscribe button, whatever all the great buttons are. If you've got a few seconds to give us a review, it goes a massive way to helping us with better distribution of the podcast. If someone you think may enjoy this one, please kick it over to them. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to all of you next week.
There's something wrong with this hearing aid.
Yeah, what's wrong?
And I can't hear with it.
Oh, no wonder. It's too far away.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.